It's another election here across Africa, and today we are looking at South Africa after a decisive election that held on the 29th of May 2024, and we're asking the question, what is it that we have to watch out for as the nation awaits the final or official proclamation of the elections result? Welcome to Global Insight this day, ladies and gentlemen, where we turn our focus to South Africa to discuss the event that marked the 2024 decisive polls and what lies ahead for the nation. The recent general elections in South Africa has been marked by high stakes, fierce competition, and of course potential political shifts that could reshape the country's future. Vote counting remains underway as provisional results are already being tallied by the Independent Electoral Commission. Today, altogether, we are going to analyze the election day proper, implications of the election provisional result, and explore the key challenges and opportunities facing the nation. By Sunday, the 2nd of June 2024, the winner of the general elections will be proclaimed by the Independent Electoral Commission of South Africa. And of course, we are going to answer the question if the ruling African ANC, which has been very problematic in the times following to the run-up to elections 2024, will actually secure a 50%, or will the ANC form a coalition, has been as has been anticipated before the voters cast their ballot on the 29th of May 2024. Stay tuned as we explore today's edition of Global Insight on For You Media Africa. Welcome again, ladies and gentlemen. Today we have an esteemed panel that will elucidate or give insight on our topic for discussion this day. And of course, Professor GABILA NUBONG. He's an international relations expert who doubles as a political economist. He's joining us from South Africa. Also, we have PASEKA PHARUMELE, who is an academia, member of Pan-Africanism and Progress. He is equally joining us from South Africa to discuss the topic for discussion this day, which is looking at South Africa after the 29th of May general elections. What are the stakes? What can we watch out for regarding the contested elections in South Africa? Hello to you, Professor NUBONG, and welcome, of course, to the Pan-African Television For You Media for the first time. I want to have your general perspective pertaining the conduct of the elections in South Africa.
Well, thanks so much, Clarice. Good afternoon to you. Good evening, sorry, to you. Good evening to PASEKA, my co-panelists. Good evening to your viewers. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be a part of this conversation and to give some perspectives about the elections in South Africa. I think I count myself extremely privileged to be witnessing the degree of the vibrancy of the democracy that is unfolding here in South Africa. This elections has been especially watched elections in South Africa because it has been 30 years after 1994 since the advent of democracy in the country, and in so many ways you could say that the democracy has been tested, the institutions have been tested, they have proven their robustness. The Independent Electoral Commission has demonstrated a lot of resilience in its ability to be able to organize elections. There were contestations building up to the elections, which they were able to handle, I think, reasonably well. And as far as the processes itself, about the people getting involved and expressing their their views. There's still a very high sense of enthusiasm amongst the voting population to be part of the process. So South Africa can then be an example of a country in Africa where democracy works. And it's very beautiful to see it witnessed, for us to witness it being unfolding. There's a lot of expectations, a lot that we expect to come out of these specific elections, because in so many ways, as we're going to be engaging, there are lots of new things that are different from the previous elections. But just to say that I'm happy that we have an African example of where democracy works, and it gives us hope for the rest of the continent, that we would ultimately all get to that point where we'll be able to express the freedoms and liberties that comes with free political participation, expression of choice, and in the selection of leaders. So thanks so much for that. I'll just leave that as my introductory remark and perhaps comment more on the other questions that may come up.
Thank you so much, Professor NUBONG, for that.
The Commission
for that insightful introductory statement. The sunlight will be getting a general appraiser from PASEKA PHARUMELE, South African, of course. What do you think are the factors that made the 29th May general elections in South Africa a decisive one?
Good day, Clarice, and good evening, to my fellow panelist, Prof. NUBONG. Right now, I do not know how decisive these elections are, but from my own personal point of view, but when I look at what everyone else has been saying, specifically politicians from different parties, especially those who oppose the ANC, they've said that this is a very decisive election because they believe that South Africa is on the brink of collapse. And in that, they believe that the ANC needs to be removed. If we do not remove them, then the chances of the country surviving another, 4 or 5 years of ANC ruling would not be possible. We are less likely to be successful with a country that is governed by the ANC moving forward. But for me, I do not believe, or nor do I agree with the logic that these elections are they are as important as we make them out to be. Elections are generally important, obviously, but they do not, for me, look like elections that are make it or break it. Because I do think as much as we have a lot of problems, our problems in South Africa are a lot, specifically problems of electricity, and we know how the electricity generally affects things like the economy, chances and likelihoods of people being employed, employability. So if that is, if we think about it from that point of view, then we are of the perspective that if that is not resolved, then we might find ourselves in a difficult position. But to be honest, having traveled a lot, gone to a lot of countries, I genuinely do believe that South Africa has not gotten to a breaking point. I do believe that we can still be a functional country. So I do not see the election being as pivotal as we tend to make it out to be. But from a political point of view, I do think that we might have something that we have not seen with the ANC, in them being forced to go into a coalition with another party and being forced to compromise their own power, in a sense that they would have to now share decision making with other parties. So that on its own is a very important thing that I think is very pivotal for this election. And as the trend is currently going, I think that there is a significant chance of us seeing an ANC that goes into a coalition leading into the following into the next 4 years. So that is just my introductory position. I do think that the elections, as always, are important, but I do not think that we are on the brink, as some tend to make it out to be. So yeah, I think that that speaks to what I've been thinking recently.
Okay, thank you so much, PASEKA PHARUMELE. And some pundits advocate that the election actually remains decisive because of the zester and, of course, the interest that we saw, particularly coming from the younger population towards exercising this democratic rights. We're talking about 30 years, and these elections have actually been likened only to that that of the 1994 when democracy, or the door of democracy, opened in South Africa. Before we continue with understanding the stakes that will define the country in the next coming years, let's listen to the Chief Electoral Officer, Mama Bolo, who actually outlined, of course, during a press briefing, the specificities of some of the areas they focus on while preparing South Africa for the elections that was yesterday, the 29th of May 2024.
The Commission reports a smooth start to national and provincial elections for 2024. By 7 o'clock, 93% of our network of 23,292 voting stations were reported open, both physically and online. The remainder of the voting stations at which we were delayed opened within the hour. We also unfortunately report that there were a number of voting stations at which we opened late, owing to delays on our material handling, also related to issues of escort where there were not enough security services to escort our material, including protest in certain communities. In most stations, queues had already formed before the stations were meant to open at 7. This, we think, is testament to the enthusiasm of South Africans to record their political choice. The Commission respects its obligation to ensure that each of the 27 million registered voters will receive an opportunity to record that choice before voting closes this evening. At 12 o'clock, the election operations around the country were reported to have been in good progress with minimal incidences that we are dealing with. Some of the incidences that we had to deal with are the following: late delivery of ballot papers, mostly in the city of Johannesburg and Region 3, which is the Sandton, Dunkeld, and Heidi Park area, as well as the Reduport area, because of departure to the strict instruction of delivery. People were being innovative, and in the process, they delayed the supply of voting materials to those stations. In the Eastern Cape, we had 5 voting stations that were not opened owing to community protest. Again, there we have confirmation that working with the South African Police Department, the voting stations are now open. There were 2 in Ntabankulu, 1 in Winnie Mandela, 1 in Port St. John's, and 1 in Enyandeni. Similarly, there were 20 voting stations at which we opened beyond 9 o'clock in the area of eThekwini, as well as in Umzi Wabantu, where owing to community protest, the stations could not open, even though our staff were ready and able to administer the electoral project. The Commission assures voters that adequate supplies of all material, including 90 million ballot papers for all the 3 ballot types, are available, and every voter will be assisted to vote before voting stations close. We use this opportunity to remind voters of the following. 1, that they may only vote at a voting station at which they are registered, unless they had by the 17th of May given pre-notification to the Independent Electoral Commission to indicate the station at which they will vote, and to do so and present at that station today on the 29th of May. That said, a voter who had given pre-notification to vote elsewhere but finds themselves at their voting district, that voter will be allowed to vote at that voting station, and they will be entitled to receive all their 3 ballots. The Commission also confirms that voting kicked off at various correctional facilities across the country to enable inmates who are registered and incarcerated an opportunity to cast a vote and in fulfillment of Section 24B of the Electoral Commission Act. We've just concluded a meeting with the National Party Liaison Committee. Similarly, similar structures are convening in provinces as well as in municipalities made up of all contesting parties and independent candidates so that we may receive reports and follow up on the issues that contestants are raising. The Electoral Commission wishes to thank voters who've already responded to the call to vote and appeals to all those who are remaining to do so before stations close at 2100 hours. All those voters who are in queues will be assisted to vote before the voting process concludes. In areas where we've had challenges with operating our voter management device seamlessly, we have issued instruction that voting should continue using the manual voters roll. The manual voters roll is the legislated process for purposes of voting. The VMD is an addition and an additional safeguard. Thank you, Kate.
Of course, that was the Chief Electoral Officer of South Africa. Coming back to you, Professor NUBONG. We want to look at the exercise or the work put in place by the Independent Electoral Commission of South Africa. While talking earlier on, you commended South Africa as being that icon of democracy that the African continent can boast of in contemporary society. So how will the rules set by the Independent Electoral Commission feasible in ensuring a smoother run or conduct of the elections, general elections in South Africa?
Well, I think that elections in South Africa are managed by the IEC.
Professor NUBONG.
The managed by the IEC. Sorry.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. I can hear you.
Yes. Unfortunately, every time we talk about elections in South Africa, we cannot help but have at the back of our minds the experiences in other countries, other African countries specifically. And I think that the hallmark to help the rest of the continent understand the South African reality is the strength of the Independent Electoral Commission, that it is somewhat, I think, to a very significant extent, when compared to other instances of the continent, insulated from political interference. I don't think it's watertight. I don't think it's perfect. PASEKA may not agree with me on this one. I personally felt a little bit uncomfortable with the way they handled a few of the cases moving up to the elections, especially the case of President Zuma. I have my conspiracy theories about the functioning of the Constitutional Court in the last couple of years. But this side of eternity, this side of heaven, we cannot expect perfection. And as functional and as efficient and as politically, as functional and as efficient as an election management body can be, I think the IEC should be commended. And I think that largely goes to, it's informed by the way it's set up within the Constitution. Its mandate is preserved, protected, set up by the Constitution. They even do have electoral courts that make and sit and make decisions on contested issues. They take responsibility. I'm speaking very superficially from just my understanding of their actions. Unlike some other countries that I know, they are responsible for the registration of political parties. They're responsible for the management of the electoral process. So it's a space, it's a rules-based system where the rules of the game is transparent. Everybody knows according to what rules they are playing. And you have intermediaries that can come in and do an assessment of how well the rules have been applied. If you take just the question about registration of political parties, you would admit with me that in some other countries, political parties are registered by a government department. And this government department is headed by a minister that is appointed by an executive that is also a contestant in the election. And so it sort of causes the process to lack the kind of independence that would make for true political contestation. And that we commend and give credit to South Africa to say, to the extent that the institutions are set up to be independent, governed by their own constitutional mandate, having a set of rules and regulations that is clear and transparent for everybody, and being able to be evaluated by the judiciary, independent of the interference of the executive, it provides a somewhat really commendable democratic space that makes for free contestation. And that South Africa should be commended for, because it is rare on the continent. It's almost non-existent everywhere. So all the, I mean, at the end of the week before the week of the elections, the president goes on TV and does an election introductory speech to announce a milestone, and then he gets blamed for using national media for political campaigning. That's how much of the consciousness of true competition, that the process is supposed to be competitive. Indeed. Which makes democracy healthy. And you see the people feel they are consulted, they feel that their views and their voices are heard, and every political party that participates in the process has access to the people and is provided somewhat. You know, people would approach the process with different resources and different strategies and different tactics, but there is no referee player in the process that is seeking to skew the game to their favor. And that, for political contestation purposes, I think it's really positive and really commendable. And from that perspective, the IEC up to this point, we may have our conspiracies about where they are being influenced or not, but I think that they have played quite above board, in my opinion, up to this point.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor NUBONG. In the same perspective of PASEKA PHARUMELE, we want to get your viewpoint because we are looking at South Africa to the looking at the reports coming from South Africa, which you being on the field can actually refute or actually affirm these reports. Looking at the role of the independent electoral commissioner, an event that actually led to the 29th of May presidential election. Can you, as a citizen in South Africa, say that the electoral commissioner is a void of interference, maybe sharing the viewpoint of Professor NUBONG, and also analyze the fact that some voters were not happy because they said there were long lines leading to elections, and that already was a setback for the Electoral Commission. What can you say regarding the whole process on the Independent Electoral Commission in South Africa?
Thank you, Clarice. From my own observation, I think the IEC did very well with what they could do, with what they had access to, because we need to also recall that their budget was also cut down. So because of austerity measures, obviously, the country is not doing too well economically. So that means that you are bound to have a situation where you cut on a lot of things. The danger with that is that the IEC is supposed to be one of the strongest bodies that you have in a country that upholds democracy, because a strong IEC means a strong election and thus a strong democracy. So once now you have a position, you find yourself in a position in which the IEC is not able to employ sufficient people, the IEC is not able to market itself, because one of the roles that the IEC has to do is to be able to market voting, to encourage people to vote. As we saw, as we saw post 94 with the elections, the IEC was a very prevalent body which you could see everywhere when you're approaching the elections. But now it's not the same thing. And that being said, with it not being the same body, because specifically because of the finances, I do not think that they will be as efficient as they are supposed to be. So I do understand that few of us do have our conspiracy theories, because I have had my own for a lot of time if the IEC can actually be a legitimate body. But if I make the argument that there is the legitimacy in the IEC, I need to be able to prove it, But for now, I am not able to actually give evidence of that engagement. So I do not believe that they are corrupt in any way or form. Maybe inefficient, but I think there is a reason for the inefficiency. And I think we saw that reason when the government when they were making an announcement that they cannot be able to give them the finances that they were meant to give them. So that on its own is a bit tricky. But in general, our institutions are quite strong, and I do agree with Prof that the way that the Constitutional Court and the law in general have handled the Jacob Zuma case has been a bit suspect, because there's a lot of questionable decisions that have been made until this point. But we've come to also learn that Jacob Zuma is a very strong man. He's a very politically strong man. So with him being that strong, we are now finding ourselves in a new political dispensation in South Africa, and finding ourselves in a world in which we have not been in. The MK, no one thought that they would do as well as they've done. Maybe people in KZN would have thought that they would do as well as they've done. But myself, personally, I've had many engagements before, but I did not see it. But outside of that, I do genuinely believe that the IEC is a body that can be trusted. There can be problems of lines, but I think that, as I said, I think that there is a reason and rationale behind why we had such long lines. And also another thing that was not anticipated, as Prof and myself witnessed, is so many people actually coming out to vote. South Africa has a problem of lack of turnout. We got too comfortable and got to a point where people felt, nah, I don't need to go vote. There's no reason to vote. People have their own reasons and etc. But with this election, we had a huge turnout. Places that you would go to, I remember a few years ago, I would go voting at around 2 o'clock, and then there would be no one. I would count the people on my line, because they do it in alphabetical order. And there wouldn't be a lot of people, maybe 3 people and whatnot. But now that was not possible anymore, because there's huge turnout. So I think that also might have also caught off the IEC itself. They did not anticipate such a huge turnout. But also that turnout might speak to a deeper political reality of South Africans. And if it does, it would be interesting, because that means that we are gaining some political consciousness, even though people are voting for the parties that I wouldn't vote for, or I wouldn't encourage voting for. But we are maybe seeing a huge political awakening, and that would be brilliant for the country, because a country that understands politics and the reality of how politics affect all of us in the country is a country that can be liberated from its shackles. So even though the ANC is doing well, it might be the product of that, but the ANC is not doing as well as it has done over the years. This is the first time I see them struggling so much early in the counting, and that for me is promising, because I know ideally the ANC is supposed to be the best party that we have. Ideologically, it's supposed, and in terms of policy in general, it's supposed to be the best party that we have, and the country that can take us forward, because the ANC has a long history. It has a long history with liberation. It's a well-known party, and it's the oldest liberation party in the continent. So if that is being said, if we take it from that point of view, you understand that they have some kind of political credibility to govern us. But there's a lot that they need to wake up to, and understanding that these elections should be an indicator to them that if they do not wake up from where they are, there's going to be problems. And going back to your question quickly, sorry, there's a point that I thought about and I didn't mention.
Yeah.
a lot of the people who've been trying to disprove or delegitimize the IEC, a lot of them, I saw them coming through the MK. Before that, I had not seen a lot of people trying to do that, because this is weaponizing the election. If you try to disprove or delegitimize the IEC, it means that you can contest the results of the election. But I do not see that happening, based purely off what we're currently seeing happening in the KZN. And with that being said, I think more than anything, those who raise this are those who have alternative plans for us. They have agendas in the background, because they have not been able to prove even one situation or one example of the IAC not being legitimate. Thank you, Clarice.
Thank you so much for that, PASEKA PHARUMELE. While talking, of course, we looked at the situation in Africa at the particular at the moment, and of course, seeing the political awareness across the continent, South Africa being that beacon of hope of political democracy. Coming back to you, Professor NUBONG, while talking earlier on, you highlighted, of course, the circumstances surrounding the candidature of former South African President Jacob Zuma, and while also talking, PASEKA highlighted the fact that the ANC has been really engaged in this year's election, trying to maybe maintain its position as the ruling, the #1 party with the history in South Africa. This shows, of course, a political maturity and seeing the involvement of the population in the political life of their nations. But now the question we want to answer is the performance of the MK party of Jacob Zuma. You know, the emergence of the party under former President Jacob Zuma is, according to report, has garnered some support, and the provisional results are telling us that this party is winning in Zuma's hometown, KwaZulu-Natal. So in your own perspective, Professor NUBONG, what factors may have contributed to this shift in voter preferences, given the timeline that Zuma's party came to the fore?
Thanks so much, Clarice. I wish PASEKA had an EFF person here to respond to his sentiments about the ANC. I would try to stick on the lane of an analyst, so that I don't express my preferences about how well and vibrant of a party the ANC is. They have their strengths, no doubt. They have lots of challenges in the last couple of years. The MK party, I think, like PASEKA said, its emergence draws support from the traditional political stronghold of President Zuma. Any keen observers of African politics for the last couple of years, the last two decades, I would say, and even more, would understand that the configuration of the support of the ANC that came from KZN was largely based, I would say, from some of the supporters that are sympathetic to President Zuma. The KZN in South Africa is one of those very, very unique provinces in its political disposition, all the way back from the post-apartheid years. They have pockets of very strong sympathies to specific political leaders. I'm thinking about the late Mangosuthu Buthelezi, the former leader of the IFP, that essentially maintained his stronghold within the certain segments of the province from post-1994 until he bowed out of the political scene, and his party has maintained that support base, and which I don't think it's an uncommon thing. I think that KZN KZN in South Africa seems to be the only province that seems to fit that profile. There are new parties coming up in different provinces, but I think KZN is the only province that seems to fit that profile of the correlation between the political origins of the political party leader and support from his province. PASEKA, I speak on that correction. I can't think of any other province that immediately fits that over an extended period of time.
Yeah.
And so from that perspective, some people call it Zulu nationalism, right? I'm deliberately trying to step out of that, to stay away from that. I'm trying to sound as politically correct as possible. So which is short to say that the support that President Zuma used to bring from the KZN to African National Congress as a national party was pretty much his support base. And just for some odd reason, the explanation that can be given there. It's a province that whose political outcome is largely related to the relationship between political actors and the royal household of the Zulu people, and how the position that such an individual holds within the sentiments of the people as far as his relationship with the Zulu nation, as they call it. I think in South Africa it's still very much perceived as a people that have a king, that have lands. They had a very special negotiation. PASEKA may give us more details, but in 1994, when the country became democratic, KwaZulu-Natal was one of the provinces that had a very special negotiation with the new political dispensation as to how they want to relate with the state. That negotiation included the management of certain portions of their land. It negotiated the relationship between their king and the state. And all political actors that have emerged out of that province have a specific, fall within that specific context. So that then explains why if President Jacob Zuma, as one of the leading figures from the ANC, who has consistently brought in support to the ANC from that region, if he falls out with the ANC, he sort of goes away with his support base. So that explains the reality, and I think that's a part of it that it has to do with the evolution of politics in the last couple of years. There's the legal part of it. The law is the law. It applies to everybody. But there's also the political sentiment part of it. A lot of people were not quite happy with the way President Zuma was treated during his engagement and the State Capture Commission that ended him with a jail sentence that caused him to go to prison and caused a series of riots. So I think this election was an opportunity for him, not just for that specific incident, but for an accumulated range of unhappy exchanges with his party to make a point about how he feels about how he has been treated.
Okay.
And I think that he's making that point very decisively, to the much delight and satisfaction of some segments of the political space, because he's throwing competition into that space and eating into the support of the ruling party and forcing coalitions certainly in provinces like KwaZulu-Natal and upsetting the balance at the level of national scale. So it's interesting times in politics, and the people of KwaZulu-Natal are firmly behind President Zuma. At least the people that support him are firmly behind President Zuma, as the people that support the IFP are 30%. But on the national scale and what that means for the national elections, I'm particularly very optimistic. I would say optimistic about the advent of increased competition. Some people feel it's going to make for chaos.
Yeah.
But I just feel that when you find yourself in a position where your grip on power is shaken, it reduces the kind of incentives that you have to be able to make certain careless decisions, for lack of a better word. Because you are faced with a situation where your grip on power is not sure, and where you have to concentrate to make sure that you not just form coalitions to stay in power, but you perhaps manage more efficiently to stay in power. So there's a coalition and power conservation game, and in that mix of pressure and competition, there is the fact that you are under higher scrutiny And higher scrutiny says that where you should have laid back and rested on your laurels and enjoy a 70% majority in the province and own the provincial legislature and manage the budget the way you want, when you do have to perhaps sit on the knife edge with a smaller majority and people that are not from your parties getting involved in the business of government, hopefully it should lead to better management to the extent that they can find agreement around the priorities that matter for the people. It can also turn out to be completely chaotic. And any person who looks at it from either angles, I think, would have very strong arguments to make with respect to that. We have seen evidence of chaos in some coalition governments that were established at the provincial level from the last elections, and some people think that that is going to be extended to the national scale. But from a positive light, some of those governments were able to be more functional, were able to, in some instances, fight corruption, just because it's not PASEKA, my body, that is sitting across the table with whom we need to strike the deals. It's a completely different phase that access to different set of political principles. And from that perspective, we can now all focus on the business of governance and management of the people. But if we are all from the same parties, within the same cadres and share the same incentive sets, and it's our bodies that are holding all the institutions of check and balances, it perhaps may increase the incidence of corruption. I personally think that coalitions, the coalitions that are going to be formed from these elections moving forward, I think there will be efficiency gains. Okay. That is maybe it's just me being very optimistic and positive. But I think there will be efficiency gains that would emerge out of these coalitions instead of chaos. That would make for better service delivery for the people.
Absolutely, yeah. Of course, Professor NUBONG, if the will of the people actually is met after a possible coalition, then I think South Africa would still stand out to be that country in Africa that has understood that we have to contextualize democracy and see that it meets the aspirations of the people. Before we listen to outgoing President Cyril Ramaphosa, I'll come briefly to you, PASEKA PHARUMELE. While talking earlier on, you highlighted some points which I would love that you should dwell on. It's about the political dispensation across South Africa. You noted that the emergence of the MK and also the enthusiasm that other opposition parties actually expressed during these 2024 general elections gave a push to the ruling African National Congress, ANC. Now let's try to understand what Professor NUBONG highlighted earlier on, looking at wanting to be at the helm for the benefit of the people and wanting to be under helm for political gains. Where can you situate the political parties given in the place of political rhetorics in Africa?
Thank you, Tharis. I think at this point, a lot of our parties do not necessarily want to govern for the people. Maybe barring the EFF, because the EFF, I think, is a different party altogether. And the way that they have positioned themselves and the way that they have acted so far is to work for the people. They've positioned themselves as the party that is going to do anything to make sure that the people are liberated. And specifically when I speak of the people, I speak of the black majority who live in poverty and in squalor. And that is very important. That is very key, because a lot of people do not understand what the EFF means when it speaks of its position as a Pan-African party, when it discusses border policy, when it discusses economics. The EFF is thinking 10 steps ahead of a lot of the parties in this country. Intellectually, I do not think that there is a party that I can equate to the EFF. Their biggest problem is that South Africa still suffers from a lot of Afrophobia, and I do say that with the understanding that it is people can try to justify it how they want, but a lot of the reasons why the EFF even now are continuing to lose votes is because purely based off that Afrophobia actually, and the Americanization of South African politics. You know, because and South African society in general, Americanization of South African politics and South African society, because populists, like you'll notice parties such as the PA, Patriotic Alliance, who really push a lot of xenophobic statements or phobic statements and etc. They are going to gain. They are going to do quite well for first timers in the national election, but the EFF will lose based purely off that. But I think more than anything, it's a lack of understanding of what the EFF want to do. The EFF does, when they say we do not put South Africa first, we put black people first. They are speaking exactly that. They're saying exactly that. Obviously, you understand from a point of politics, you have to be quite sensitive in some things, which Julius Malema himself is not the most sensitive of politicians. And with him not being that sensitive in how he presents his positions, it becomes a bit more difficult for him to get the support that he deserves. That I believe that a lot of people who call themselves or who position themselves as Pan-Africanists think that he deserves. So the EFF is the one party that I think has potential to do exactly that, put the people first, while at the end of the day, the ANC has done quite well. You know, a lot of people had expected that the ANC was going to have collapsed this country a long time ago, just pre-93, pre-94, and in the early to mid-90s. They were working with, a lot of people were working with the assumption that the ANC would collapse this country. But look at where we are. As much as things are not perfect, as I said, but this is one of the most functional countries that you would live in. You can travel to Europe and come back and you hear South Africans saying, I'm having such a good time here. I really enjoy living here, because it is quite functional. The only thing that they lack is a lack of leadership in terms of actual governing of the country. Because if you have people who have initiative, people who want to govern this country, then they will do quite well. So that is why I cannot put them in the same place and say that they stand for the people of this country, because they've proven themselves and failed in multiple occasions. They've done what they could, but I genuinely do believe that they are not the party to take the country forward. However, I know that I'm not the general population, so it's just my own opinion. And Prof did speak to a lot of things, and he was...
I will come to you subsequently, PASEKA. Of course, the will of the people will actually be noted when we have the final and official proclamation of the result on Sunday. And I'm going to invite us all to listen to outgoing President Cyril Ramaphosa to what he said after casting his ballot on the 29th of May 2024.
This is a great day for democracy in South Africa. It's a wonderful day as well, bright and sunny. And I've heard that voting has started throughout the country, and it is going well. I am very delighted to be here, of course, with my wife, to come and vote in the township where I grew up, with the permission of the IEC. So it's wonderful to arrive here and to meet so many people who are coming to vote. They're voting for the stabilization and the extension of our democracy. And that is a great day for the people of South Africa. This is the day when South Africa decides on the future of our country, who should lead the government of South Africa. And I have no doubt whatsoever in my heart of hearts that the people will once again invest confidence in the African National Congress to continue to lead this country. I went into the voting station and greeted the various party agents and urged them to be relaxed and to smile. And then I proceeded to cast my vote. So it's a wonderful day, and I think it will go very well throughout the country. I spoke to the chair of the Independent Electoral Commission, and I told him that I'm now entering his precinct. At the door, at the gate, I said, I stopped being president. He's in charge and he's the boss. So I'm happy to be under his command, and to be in the precinct that he controls for the day until he announces the results. So thank you very much for being here in your large numbers. It just goes to show the interest that the world also has in our democracy. I met a number of observers, and President Goodluck Jonathan of Nigeria is leading here the observers from the AU and a number of other observers. So I was very delighted to meet them, and many other organizations are also represented here from various countries, particularly here in SADC. So we are really heartened to hear that there are so many observers. The chair of the commission tells me that we've got 190 observers who've come to observe our election. And I'm sure, as always, the IEC will run a good election, and they will once again deliver a really good results, outcome. I've been very impressed, even as I've watched their operations from afar. I haven't visited the center yet. It's one of the best, world-class, well-organized, well executed. So I think the IEC gets my vote today. It's a pity they didn't run as a party, but they get my vote. So thank you very much for all of you being here. The IEC has raised its concerns, but also incidents, or one incident where the police even had to intervene by arresting those who were interfering in the work of the IEC. The work of the IEC is sacrosanct. It should never be interfered with, because when you interfere with the work of the IEC, you are really interfering with our democracy. You are trying to subvert the will of the people, and the will of the people of South Africa should never be obstructed, be interfered with, or be obstructed in any way whatsoever. So we are concerned, and we once again call on all South Africans, particularly on this day and the next few days coming when the results will be counted, and before they are announced, that all of us must abide by the prescripts of our electoral law and our constitution as well. But I have my full confidence in our security officers throughout the country that they are going to execute their work. They will make sure that those who seek to embark on ways that will disrupt our elections will be dealt with, and they will be dealt with severely. Some political parties have taken issue with the address I delivered. It had two components. One component was to talk about the readiness of the elections, and the other component was to close off on the administration. Our administration, the sixth administration, is coming to an end, and we sought to say the people of South Africa, as they go to the elections, to choose whatever party they want, should be assured that a great deal of work has been done by all of us. All South Africans have been involved in pushing this country forward. And I was very careful to say all of us South Africans. But that is a matter that is now subject to the courts, and the less said, even by myself, the better. The people of South Africa will give the ANC, as they vote today, a firm majority. So in my mind, in my head, and in my thought processes, there isn't even a doubt about that. The ANC, under my leadership, ran a formidable campaign. We went through the length and the breadth of the country to reach out to our people, and to also make those who may well have been, doubtful about voting, to be encouraged to vote. We were rather pleased that we saw more and more young people registering to vote, and we kept on urging the people of our country that we want to run a clean campaign, which we did, and we are determined to ensure that democracy is the winner in this whole election. So in the end, it is the democratic process in our country that is going to emerge victorious.
Kick off the coalition prospect with you. How significant is the projected loss of parliamentary majority for the African National Congress in the 2024 general elections? And secondly, what implications does this or will this have for the political landscape in South Africa? Your own viewpoint, please.
Is that directed to me?
Sure, Professor NUBONG.
Right. Sorry, your volume was off, so I didn't hear the first part of the question. With respect to the projected loss of majority, I think it's going to be very interesting times. I think PASEKA, we have not seen anything like this before, because coalitions operate at three different levels. So you have the local government level, you have the provincial government level, and you then have the national government level. Now, I think all the polls that went ahead of these elections projected that the ANC was going to come in around 41 to 42%. And they suggested that, of course, the DA was going to come second, and EFF. And I only had one poll that actually predicted that MK was going to come in at 14% ahead of the EFF to be the third party and not the second, as opposed to the fourth party. But this is what it means practically: that yes, they would need to form a coalition to govern. And the difference between coalitions in this instance, and I'm looking at. I'm submitting that the easiest part would be to establish that coalition that says these are the entities that have come together to make the 50+1 to form the government. I don't think that that's going to be too much of a complicated thing to accomplish. We have configurations about the possible games that would have to play out. So if the ANC comes in around 40 to 42%, it's going to need at least an 8% to govern. Of the other parties, that is the Democratic Alliance, EFF, and MK, those are the only, from the polls, those are the only other three parties that would be able to have the whole 8%, assuming that ANC comes in at about 42, 43%. The only other three parties that are projected to have above 7% of the national vote, assuming that you're talking about a two-person coalition, would either be the Democratic Alliance, the EFF, and possibly the MK, the President Zuma's party. So it would then have to be, and of course the ANC then has the possibility of assembling the support from all the small parties, whether or not we'll be able to put, if it can come in the upper part of the 40s, so 42, 43, it will just have to find 8%. Would it be able to get the 8% from all the other parties? It's not clear, because the distribution of the national vote is quite segmented in specific chunks. A huge chunk goes to the Democratic Alliance, a huge chunk goes to the MK, a huge chunk goes to the to the EFF and then to the MK, and then you then have now your IFPs of the world and your Freedom Fronts of the world and the Inkatha Freedom Party. These other parties that come after the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th position, whether they'll be able to put together the kind of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8% that the AFC requires to govern, it's subject to a different question, it's different consideration.
Yeah.
However, of the parties that are not within the first 4, a number of them have already expressed coalition with the Democratic Alliance. When push comes to shove, whether or not they will be able to respect the terms of this coalition at the national level is a different question.
Absolutely.
So the ANC would most likely have to then approach one of the 3 parties if it's looking for a single party with which they can co-govern. either Democratic Alliance, the Economic Freedom Fighters, or President Zuma's party, because in all likelihood, those three parties are most likely from the polls going to be the parties that would have the above 7% as a single bloc that would be required to co-govern. Which of these parties is he going to choose? It's really, and I think PASEKA would have a view on that. Absolutely, it's really neither here or there. There was a strong sentiment building up to the elections that President Zuma and the EFF could quickly come together and get into a coalition with the ANC, and that's possible. So an ANC-EFF coalition is possible. An ANC-EFF-MK coalition is possible. Depending on what the MK gets, an ANC-MK coalition is possible. The question and the catch and the challenge which we are all anticipating or wondering was, what would be the terms of that coalition? What would these parties ask for in exchange for their votes? Now, we know that the campaign of President Zuma has been a campaign against the ANC of Cyril Ramaphosa, which has led some pundits to make the argument that perhaps his condition for making a coalition with the ANC would be ask the ANC to give up Cyril Ramaphosa as president. But that's extremely complicated.
Indeed.
In terms of the ability to be able to form government as a straightforward, we have had these past instances in which we know that the ANC in some instances have been able to willing to recall their presidents, but it's been a completely different context. The last two presidents who were recalled came from internal contestation at a time where they had completed electoral conferences that had elected a president and a vice president of the party before the elections. A coalition that is going to come after these 2024 elections that is asking for the head of President Cyril Ramaphosa would not be asking just for the head of state. They will be asking for the head of the party. Yeah. Now, how do you get the party to give up its president as head of the executive, which it can do because it is the party? They just need to get the parliamentary caucus to agree that Mr. Malema or Mr. X from MK is going to be the vice president, as some have suggested, is going to be our presidential candidate, and that would be voted in parliament because that is now a parliamentary responsibility.
Absolutely.
But the mandate of President Cyril Ramaphosa as head of the ANC, head of the party, was obtained at the electoral conference, the elective conference. Now, irrespective of what coalitions conversations take place, he is head of the ANC, and he has a 5-year mandate that he just started, which complicates the situation because if you ask for either the head of the, because if most parties want to go to coalition seeking a top job, it has been tradition in the past for the ANC to get both its president of the party and the vice president of the party to be head of state and deputy president. Now, any of these coalitions asking for any of these two positions will be asking an ANC president or an ANC vice president not to be a state president or a state vice president for 5 years. That is going to be tough.
Indeed. Indeed.
It's going to be tough. So it's very interesting times. We are keeping fingers crossed. So whether they'll be able to sit down and because to put pressure on the incumbents to give up, because the argument is going to be put to the principle that says it is either you give up your position of state president or you give up your position of vice president, or we lose power and go to the opposition. That is the alternative that they would have. Absolutely. The question then is if one of those two, assuming that the coalition partners go for the top job, if one of those two agrees to step down from the state position, they remain in that position in the party. And the party actually is the one that retains power. So you would have a situation in which for the very first time since 1994, we've had instances like that before, but both instances were very brief, where you had a state president and a party president that were not the same people. Those are very brief instances. Briefly between President Zuma and President Beki, briefly between President Zuma and President Kaliba Mokante, but those were all sort of transitional arrangements that did not really last. Very briefly between President Ramaphosa and President Zuma after the elective conference, but this would be the beginning of a new administration where you will be asking the ANC to give up the top job. Now, how they would arrive at that, it's going to be our most difficult experience moving forward. Whoever needs to give up that position retains the power in the party, which then brings us to the question of governance. Because after you have designated the executive, you need to still go back to parliament. You still need to go and form coalitions. And the parties need to still vote on positions and still take decisions that return to party positions. So whichever of these entities gives up the top job to fall back on the party will still be very powerful at the level of party and still very, very powerful at the level of parliament. And that's an extremely difficult position. Now, the question is, if you do not give up the top job, what then would the accompanying parties that come to the party ask for? You know, I've heard Julius Malema saying he's willing to push Prof Shivambu to become the Minister of Finance. So, whichever way we look at this, an ANC that comes out with a 40-odd% of the total national votes makes for very interesting politics days in politics looking forward. Very exciting. I'm looking forward to seeing how the configurations are going to play out.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping that they would come up with outcomes that would address the challenges that concern the majority of the people.
Indeed.
I have not examined the possibility of a DA-led coalition leading the government, but that is a stretch in the minds of most people. But it should not completely be ruled out. Because if they come up with close to 10%, at 30%, above 25%, at the moment they are sitting at about 25%, if at the close of polls they exit with above 30%, then they too will be looking at putting together a coalition of less than 20% in order to govern. They have had issues with the EFF in the past. I don't know whether when push comes to shove, the EFF would not want to work with the MK and the DA to kick the ANC completely out of power. You know, if something like that happened, I think we're going to have a very interesting next 5 years as a country.
Okay, yes, Professor Nubong. Indeed, it's quite an interesting moment in South Africa, and that's why some people called this election a decisive one, because of the competitive nature of it and the various stakes before, during, and after the elections, particularly on the aspect of a coalition. In the same perspective, PASEKA PHARUMELE, Professor Nubong just highlighted the complexities of forming a coalition in South Africa, what modus operandi the political parties that will come to this coalition adopt, and will this meet the aspirations of South Africans? So in your own perspective, PASEKA, I would love you to answer on the implications of that this maybe a potential coalition will have, and how this will shaken the political landscape in South Africa.
Yeah, no, Clarice, I think Prof really spoke to it in detail. And I like the fact that he spoke about a lot of the things that I was thinking about, because it's very difficult, as Prof even indicated earlier, it's very difficult for us to have a coalition that is functional in this country. We saw it when it was governing in the major cities of Pretoria and Johannesburg, even Ekurhuleni. We saw it in provincial governance. Our coalition governments have not been successful so far. And those are on the local level, right? So now it becomes even more complicated and more complex if we are now discussing national. And I was looking actually, as Prof was speaking, I was looking that how are the numbers going, and they're still going the same way they've been going the whole morning. The ANC is still on 42%, which gets you excited, because I don't think the ANC at this time have ever been around those numbers. The ANC around this time with about 20% 40% or so of the votes counted are normally above 50%. This is the first time we see this. And with my previous observations of previous elections, it's always a pattern. You see, the numbers that you see at the start are normally closest to the numbers that you'll see at the end. So I think with these current numbers, we are at a point of accepting that there will definitely be a coalition government for the first time in South Africa's democratic, in a democratic South Africa. So now, as Prof said, right now, if the trend continues and the ANC is left at 42, chances are they might not need to go into multiple coalitions. They might just need one party. And at this point, the parties that they are most likely to need for that 51 plus are the EFF and the MK party. They will have to decide between those two. But I can tell you right now with confidence that no one has dismissed the coalition with the ANC. Obviously, the MK is relatively new, so I don't think they've gone into engagements about if they would possibly get into a coalition. But historically, even the DA itself said that they would be willing to get into a coalition. And the example that Prof gave of Floyd Shivambu, where Julia said that he would like a specific position for Floyd in the ANC because he is willing to open the door for that. So it will be negotiations between them and between the ANC and the MK or the EFF. And it is most likely, I think Prof gave the perfect logic in that it will be a difficult and a very complex coalition between the ANC and the MK because the previous president, President Jacob Zuma, and the current president are not on the same wavelength. They have their own problems. So with that, it means that it becomes more complex than a coalition with the EFF, who say we want specific things and one, which is the primary thing that they want. And if I'm not mistaken, Julia said the only thing that I would request from them is for them to make Chivambu the Minister of Finance, I think. So he's requesting one thing. Compare that one thing, that specific position, to a coalition with the MK party, which now has to fight with the head of not just the country, but the head of the party. And as we've known historically, the ANC tends to defend its leaders. They tend to put party politics before country. We've seen that historically. So it is less likely that we'll find ourselves in a position where they would agree to something like that. But depending on how desperate the MK is and willing they are to get into this coalition, then there's a chance. But I do think the likeliest would be that coalition between the ANC and the EFF, which has been a long time coming. With the DA, as Prof also said, it is very complicated. And the reason for its complication is that there's just too many people who have to say yes to working with the DA. The DA is currently on 24%, if I'm not mistaken. It's currently on 24%. That means that they would need around 34% for them to be able to start negotiating with people, or just in the late 20s. It's also possible, but we know that it's possible. But how many people are willing to work with a party that has decided to become a white nationalist party? Because what we've seen with the pattern of the DA and what they've done historically, specifically in the most recent history, after they got rid of Musimaiman, they've tried to retain that support base that they had lost, specifically these white Afrikaner voters who had left them to go to the VF Plus and the likes, so they tried to retain them. And looking at the pattern of the current voting, it looks like they have been successful in retaining them. But now you need to ask the question, is the EFF willing to work with such a party? Because the DA has become one of the most embarrassing parties to black people. They've specifically targeted black leaders in trying to embarrass them. Why would the EFF agree to something like that? Even Jacob Zuma's MK, I don't know about their morality, but I do not believe that they would agree to that. So it becomes a lot more complex if the DA is trying to get into a coalition. So I do believe that Cyril Ramaphosa will come back as the president, but for the first time, and which is exciting, also scary, which is an exciting time for us who look at politics, who try to analyze politics. But it is also scary because of how we've seen coalition politics going throughout the country as of late. Yeah. I hope that I spoke to your question, Clarice.
Of course, you actually did, and we are looking at how events are unfolding and how the final results, which will be proclaimed by the Independent National Electoral Commission, which has been hailed by many South Africans, will come. Before actually going again to understanding the complexities of this coalition, I will invite us to listen also to the voice of Julius Malema, the flag bearer of the Economic Freedom Fighters Party, together with the challenger of the Democratic Alliance, and then we're going to, understand again better the narratives surrounding this decisive polls 2024 in South Africa.
It's a turning point. It's a point where our country will make a serious inroads, and a country where the voter will decide at which direction we are going as a country. So we should be able to see some changes from these elections. It's an election where everybody that you guys interview say we need change, we need jobs, we need service delivery. I've been listening to interviews all this morning. The language is the same. There's no language that says we're voting for the jobs that we received, we're voting for the houses we received, we are very happy with our government. No, everyone you interviewed say we have gone to school, we are unemployed, and we voted and there are no services in our communities. We are now here to vote for change and vote for jobs for our people. We see ourselves overtaking the ANC, not the DA. The DA is small boys. We have no time for small boys. We are going for the real giant, which is the ANC. We are in an election to remove the ANC. So we don't talk about opposition parties. How can you have all political parties formed and then are taking one opposition party? They are all opposition parties, but they all attack this opposition party and they don't attack the ruling party. I've never experienced a situation where a voter has to wait for 4 hours to cast their vote. I always used to come here with my grandmother. We used to queue, and she will not even take a seat because the queues were quicker. This queue was not long. The queue was short, the process was slow. Until we have had to make calls around the IEC head office. Intervention was made, but still.
What I've said very clearly is I don't think we're going to solve the problems of South Africa by keeping the same people around the same table, making the same bad decisions with the same bad results for South Africa. And I think this morning you've got a great juxtaposition. Just before me, Sabu Ndebele, the former premier of this province, came to vote. This is a man who's facing corruption and maladministration charges from his time as the transport minister in this country. He is still, obviously wanting to see justice in this case and to see him charged properly. But isn't that an incredible juxtaposition that he is quite proudly able to come and don an ANC t-shirt and vote in front of the cameras, despite the fact that he joins 97 other of his comrades and colleagues who have been found by the Zondo Commission to have been involved in alleged corruption, maladministration and jobs for pals that have crippled our country. So I don't think keeping those people around the cabinet table is going to solve the problems facing South Africa, which is why I fundamentally believe that residents in this election need to vote for change, and they need to vote for a clean, accountable government, and that can only come through the multi-party charter and its allies. There are other parties that are not currently part of the multi-party charter. It remains to be seen how they do in this election. But if the multi-party charter doesn't get over the 50% plus one mark, we will talk to other parties that are not part of the charter to see what can be done to prevent a doomsday coalition between the ANC and the EFF taking place, or instability and chaos. And I think that, as I said, the DA is ready to play its responsible part as an anchor tenant The first thing that needs to be done is to open up and break the government monopoly on electricity generation and supply. You cannot grow an economy, you cannot create jobs, you cannot build a better life for people without electricity. And then a major focus on infrastructure to ensure that our infrastructure is able to facilitate growth. Our road network is in destruction, our rail network has been destroyed, our ports and harbours are destroyed and inefficient and ineffective, and that is holding back economic growth. Thirdly, we would introduce a new bill that would bring in the scorpions so that we could start going after the corrupt, and we will start with the 97 people who are named in the Zondo Commission report to have a multidisciplinary task team to go after them, to make sure that they are prosecuted and thereby setting an example. And then within the first 100 days we're ready to table the end cadre deployment bill in Parliament that will bring to an end for any political party the prospect of being able to deploy people into key positions that are loyal only to the party and not to the people, and are deployed based on know who, not know how, because we need to have a stable, honest, effective public service to be able to deliver to the people of South Africa. You can have the best policies, the best plans. If you don't have a public service that is fit for purpose and able to implement those, you don't have a chance in hell of getting your policy.
It is indeed a complex political atmosphere in South Africa as votes accounting remains underway. What is the fate of this country after, or what will be the fate after the proclamation of the election results? And if the ANC does not actually secure that majority of 50% plus that can actually downplay the prospect of a coalition. Let me start off with you this time around during this last segment. We have about 10 minutes to be together at PASEKA formally. When we listen to all the leaders, the political parties, actually they are actually centered on change, citing instances of corruption, unemployment, and we cannot also forget the aspect of xenophobia in South Africa. We heard the leader of the Democratic Alliance Party saying that there is need to actually stop a possible coalition between the ruling ANC and the EFF of Julius Malema. In your own perspective, how will these political differences undermine the political democracy of the country, or do you think that it is very possible to traverse or go surmount all of these political contestations which are coming as a result of a possible coalition in South Africa?
With specifically the DA, the Democratic Alliance, I struggle with the DA because the DA more and more are a party that we specifically who regard ourselves as Pan-Africanists and black people need to live in the past. Because if you listen to the logic of the DA leader, it's what we call swart gevaar. What that is black fear. So this is what the apartheid government did before the ANC came into power. They pushed this narrative that black people are so dangerous that you cannot allow them to govern. So the DA is doing exactly that when they speak about how governance of the EFF and the ANC would be an apocalypse of sort in this country. So it's really difficult for me to take the leader of the DA serious. I have a problem that they are gaining so much support. But I'm also cognizant of how South Africa is actually moving away from politics of association to more politics of racialized politics and tribalized politics. I think that we are going to see more and more of that trend as we grow as a democracy in future, and that is very problematic and that is very scary for us. But I think that if we try to base an engagement off what as the DA's statement Hazen has said, it becomes very difficult because the DA's leader is really an unthinker. And I do say this not just as a human being, but as an analyst, because I've been looking and I've been observing politicians for so long now that you can hear leaders who actually rationalize when they speak. And to an extent, I also find this ironic, because what I'm saying ironic, because Julius Malema was saying they are not aiming for the DA, they're aiming for the ANC. But that is also a level of delusion that he also needed to recognize, because we could already see the pattern that the AFF was losing support, as I indicated the reasons at the start. So there was no way they were going towards the ANC. At the most, they could have had the hope of going after the DA. But we also do understand that the DA itself also knew that there's a chance that they might be challenged by the EFF, and that is why at some point they also recognize that they have zero chance of them leading this country. So they would rather go to those who look like they are coming towards them, and specifically in this case and in point, the EFF, sorry, and now as of recently the MK party. So you see, it's them understanding that their position is where is them being the opposition. They have no potential of being the actual leaders of this country, and I do believe that they do recognize that at this point. Okay. But I'll leave it there because of the time left, Clarice. Thank you.
Of course, thank you so much, PASEKA PHARUMELE. We'll be following events as they unfold in South Africa, and we'll obviously come to complete what we started today. Let me round off with you, Professor NUBONG, concluding a statement pertaining the state of affairs in South Africa right now.
Interesting times, Clarice. As PASEKA is speaking, I'm looking back and just thinking to myself what a missed opportunity this is for opposition politics in South Africa. Musi Maimane was on a good trajectory in terms of transforming the DA to become a rainbow party for South Africa. And I am just thinking of a scenario where a Musi-led DA was going into these elections, our conversation will be completely different. Because Musi and Julius and MK could very quickly form a coalition that could see an overthrow of the ANC and completely bring us in a different space. So notwithstanding all the weaknesses of the ANC as a political party and the different political actors, I think that, like he says, our issues are quite complex. The response of the various segments and the constituencies in articulating their issues are also quite complex. I think we need to pray for the country. When I look at it through the eyes of an economist, I'm very concerned with where we are 30 years after democracy. I wish there were some things we did in 1994. I wish we instituted fees-free education in 1994. I wish we had created a level playing field to build the capacity of the vast majority of the people. I don't agree I agree with John Steenhuisen's policies on efficiency and fight of corruption. I don't agree with his market fundamentalist policies, because I think South Africa is a very unique country that would not strive on a private sector-led growth model. And this is not wishful thinking. We tried that in 1996 with GEAR. After President Mandela handed over to Mbeki, and we tried it at GISA, and we saw the limitations. South Africa is an economy that requires a growing productive sector, that requires a strong state with a strong capacity, that builds the capacity of the state and the productive abilities of the people before giving over to private enterprise to drive prosperity. Private enterprise is great at driving prosperity for countries that have reached a certain threshold in terms of their production capacities and development. South Africa is not there. And I don't think John Steenhuisen understands that. And the ANC, very quite unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, understands that on paper, but struggles to implement. The only people that have shown the kind of determination that it takes to make the bold decisions for implementation seems to me to be the EFF.
Okay.
But they are young, they don't have experience, they have not had extensive experience in government, but how else you gain experience than governing? So we're looking forward to the coalitions that will emerge. I don't think it's going to be a big bang transformation. I think we're going to have a positive move in the right direction, but it could be very difficult years ahead. So we will keep the country in our prayers and we keep hoping for the best.
Absolutely. We hope for the best for South Africa and also other countries in Africa that are taking a different political dispensation, putting the interest of the people first. It's about redefining a new Africa. You know, in South Africa, the key issues that some eligible voters highlighted were aspects of fighting corruption, unemployment, particularly load shedding, and of course resonated all of these resonated about among the eligible voters, and whatever political decisions or dispensations that the political leaders will be taking in the days ahead in South Africa should primarily be to actually meet the aspirations of the population, so that we can move South Africa and other countries across the continent to the place where we want to see Africa. Thank you so much, Professor NUBONG, international relations expert and also political economics. Thank you, PASEKA PHARUMELE, academia and member of the Pan-Africanism and Progress. Thank you to the technical crew for ensuring a smooth run of the program. We continue to invite you to stay tuned to programs or interesting program on the Pan-African television for you, Media Africa, and we are going to join you subsequently again to give you updates on South Africa and elsewhere across Africa and beyond. Do have a lovely time. Bye-bye.